John and Katie, whenever you two are ready, I've started recording.
Okay, terrific. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, and thanks for joining to listen to our session today. My name is John McPhee. I am the CEO of the Jed Foundation. Katie?
I'm Katie Hurley. I am the Senior Clinical Director of External Affairs for the Jed Foundation.
Terrific. So I'm going to share some slides, and Katie and I are going to walk through the slides, and then we'll have some time for questions as well. So let's see here. All right, hold on. I am going to try that again. Now it's going to work. Okay, I'm assuming that you can see these slides.
Yes.
Rachel, yes, okay. Fantastic. Okay, so we want to talk about exploring help-seeking behaviors among teenagers today. First, let me just tell you quickly about the Jed Foundation. We are a member of the Grand Challenge. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to protect emotional health and prevent suicide for teenagers and young adults. And in this work, we do work to help equip teens and young adults to navigate mental health challenges, to seek help and to give help, and to be emotionally prepared to fulfill their potential. And in this work, we do, in this domain, we do a lot of work around trying to foster help seeking and help giving and reduce stigma and barriers, attitudinal and knowledge and behavioral barriers to do so. And so that's a space that we're going to talk today about. We also work with schools and school systems to and community organizations and communities to strengthen the systems and the safety nets that support youth mental health. So I wanted to just first start by showing a public service announcement, short, just 1 minute, that's part of our Seize the Awkward campaign, which is a partnership between the Jed Foundation, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and Ad Council. This is an example of trying to encourage help giving behaviors and help seeking behaviors among youth. And then we'll talk about the research and how we're building on this work. Okay, so I'm now going to share the video. This goes as I hope. Hold on. Okay, here we go. Okay.
Don't know why it's so sad. You've got a roof over your head. Bro, you gotta stop with that depression stuff. That's a white people thing. Los hombres no lloran. All right.
Just feels like it's going from everywhere.
You want to talk about it?
Thanks for hearing me out, bro. Appreciate it.
You can talk to me if you're feeling sad. Whenever you need to talk, I'm here, okay?
So that,
Hi, my name is Mark Blyer. I
hold
run
on a
YouTube
second.
channel.
This is
Today I'm here to talk to you about the awkward moment
still
in trying to
continuing.
talk to your friends.
There we go. Now I stopped it. It was running into yet another PSA for Seize the Awkward. So that then, is an example of a campaign to foster, as we said, help seeking and help giving. What let's see here. Okay. So what's really important at the Jed Foundation, what we're trying to do here and what we wanted to share with you is this idea that, right, when it comes to reducing stigma, we are trying to change culture. We're trying to change attitudes and behaviors among young people. And to do that effectively requires a lot of market research, and it requires sort of a continual process of market research. If we think about what big brands do, whether it's Nike or Taco Bell, or, they're constantly doing research and refreshing their knowledge of what will motivate and engage their target audiences. And we need to do the same thing as a mental health field. And obviously, we don't have the same amount of money or resources as corporations. So it's important that as we do our research, we share it with each other. And I think the Grand Challenge, the Huntsman Grand Challenge, is a great way for us to sort of work collaboratively and to share our learnings together. So what we wanted to share with you is a research project that we are undertaking, and it's specifically with today's 13 to 17-year-olds, and to really try to understand and investigate the barriers to help seeking, including stigma. But also perhaps, we don't want to just put it in the stigma bucket. Some of the attitudes and behavior barriers might be adjacent to stigma or overlapping or separate, right? And so we want to understand it all. And so we've done a literature review looking at what's known when it comes to adolescence around help seeking and stigma. We've done a qualitative piece of research, in-depth interviews with 44 teenagers, and Katie's going to walk us through those learnings. They're qualitative, but they're really insightful. And we are now just about to start a quantitative research survey with 1,500 teenagers, really exploring this, and we'll share this all with all of you and everyone in the Grand Challenge. What we're trying to drive towards is to help inform the field and messaging and positioning of campaigns to teenagers around mental health, so that we can all have the same information and sort of be aiming the same way, which is the purpose of the Grand Challenge, right? To try to have all of us as members sort of swimming in the same direction. And so this research hopefully will lead us in that direction. So Katie, I don't think we're passing to you yet, right? We'll all right. I'll do the next couple of slides, and then Katie, we get into the real sort of serious, stuff and findings. Katie will take over. We commissioned a literature review on mental health stigma among teenagers, and really most of the literature is focused on adults, and primarily through a mental illness lens. And so, there isn't a lot there, essentially, is the takeaway. We had done research for Seize the Awkward together with Ad Council and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. In that earlier research, we saw a number of barriers that you could argue extended beyond traditional stigma. Barriers like not wanting to get in trouble, not wanting to break friends' confidence, those kinds of things. And so as part of this research, we want to sort of dig into that. And so the literature review simply really supported the need for this research. Okay, so this is just some data from Making Caring Common at Harvard, just came out. It's a survey or a piece of research that if you haven't seen, you should. It's really looking at the mental health of parents. And what it shows is that parents and caregivers are struggling essentially in almost as much as their teenagers. And so how do we think about this in a 2-generation way? And I encourage everybody to look at it. But this just came out, and you can see it shows reasons here why teens would not be comfortable reaching out to a caregiver and would hesitate. And it's interesting, right? They think their parents or caregivers are too busy to pay attention. They're dealing with their own stress and they don't want to bother them. They won't really understand what they're going through. They'll just try to fix the problems instead of listening or empathizing. So really, good information here and supportive of what we're seeing in the research that we've done. I think we all know what stigma is, referring to negative attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors towards people with a mental health condition. It can be public, self-stigma, institutional stigma, ethnocultural, gender. And this is really what we want to break down here and really understand how it shows up among today's teens. Now, this is back to what I said before. And again, we can argue what's adjacent, what's overlapping, is it all under stigma or not? I think that's just less important than the framework or the heuristic of understanding that there's sort of classic stigma like fears and feelings of shame and embarrassment, being seen as weak, not wanting to be seen as mentally ill, and some attitudes and behaviors around, you can see on the right, lack of knowledge, not knowing where to get help, not believing that help will be helpful, kinds of things that are just a little bit different. So with this, Katie, I'm going to pass to you to talk about what we've learned in this qualitative phase of the research.
Sure. So, as John kind of mentioned already, the objective of the study was to kind of figure out what's happening for youth. What are the barriers? Is it stigma? Do they even use the word stigma? How do they describe that? How does that feel to them? And so it was interesting. I'm going to just revert back to that Harvard slide just for a minute, because some of what's in that slide really echoes what some of the students said to us in the qualitative interviews. And the benefit of qualitative research, though it's fewer subjects, is that you get to take a deeper dive and you get to really hear their feelings around these questions versus just answering a question and moving on. And so it provides, a better blueprint for us and a little bit more context to understand what they're going through.
Yeah.
Let's move on. So here we go. This is just a quick slide, and I won't read the whole thing to you because you're looking at it, but a quick slide on our demographics and participants. Like we said, we had 44 students in total, and we tried to cast a wide net in terms of getting a diverse group of kids to speak with us. So this is sort of the quick hot take summary, but we're going to deep dive into all of these different things. But primarily, we really wanted to focus on understanding the worlds of teens, what really is happening. I am someone who's been working in the world of teens for 25 years. So a lot of what you're going to see on these slides are things that I have dealt with every day for 25 years. And I would caution us to remember as we go through these slides that teens have always had their own lexicon since forever, and it changes. It's ever changing. So, the language and words that I used as a teen are no longer in play for my teenage children right now. A really good example of sort of the divide between Gen X and Gen Z and why teens feel less understood is texting with parents. So teens right now are very adamant that you only use lowercase letters, right? And you don't use punctuation. And that to them is sort of a soft communication. It's, hey, how are you? We're friends, we're close. Where if you're using capitals and you're using punctuation, it's very formal. A teen would only text in that way to a boss or a teacher or coach or somebody that they need to show respect to in a way, but not someone that they're very close to. And this often becomes a Gen X versus Gen Z talking point. It's all over social media, again, making the rounds. Just this morning, I saw something about this. And this to them is dismissive, right? It's important to them that we meet them where they are and connect with them on their level. And when we don't do that, they feel dismissed and they feel like we don't understand. So you're going to see that come up a little bit in the following slides. So teens, my background is social work. And one thing that we always say in social work is you meet the client where they are. So whoever they are, wherever they are in this space, when you are working with someone, a teen, an adult, whoever it is, you figure out how they're interacting in the world right now, and you start there. You don't come in with expectations. You don't place your goals and expectations upon them. You meet them in their emotional space, and that's where you begin. And that's really essential when working with teens or teaching teens or just being around teens. We tend to lump every single adolescent into this group of teens the minute they turn 13, but there's a significant difference between 13 and 19, say. Now this is 13 to 17. There's a big difference between 13 and 17. 13-year-olds are shifting. They're beginning that shift into adolescence. They're thinking about friend groups. They might be changing friend groups. They're having some crushes, maybe. They're trying to navigate things like that. Older high schoolers are navigating, preparing for life, either going to college or getting a job, learning how to manage finances. All of these things come up for older teens that aren't on the radar of younger teens. So all this to say, they're all going through their own little unique periods. And it's important to remember that. That goes back to meeting them where they are. So teens today, this came up a lot in these qualitative interviews. they're just feeling a ton of pressure. And this comes as no surprise to me or anyone who works with teens on the regular, because it is a lot of pressure for them, from school pressures like academics and SATs and applying to college, and, you know, just measuring up. The constant measuring in our school systems is a lot for kids. You know, if you're not regularly involved with school systems, you don't see the amount of assessments that teachers have to give students over and over and over again. And that puts a ton of pressure on students, even when teachers say, it's okay, you're not being graded on this. This is just a measurement. This is just a measurement. They still take it in as a measurement of their success, of their abilities, and of what their future will be. So they're feeling a ton of pressure inside of schools, whether it's self-imposed pressure or it's coming from the adults around them. And then they're dealing with social pressures. In addition to things like bullying and relational aggression, which is one of my areas of expertise, they're also just dealing with shifting friendships a lot of the time. They're dealing with peer pressure, learning how to say no, or maybe not saying no to drugs and alcohol. Trying to navigate those things are complex. They're feeling a lot of stress just about growing up and leaving the nest. So we don't always think of teens as thinking about that, but when I talk to teens, it comes up very often with older teens. How do I know if I'm ready to leave? How am I going to know how to change a tire? How am I going to know how to pay for things? What if I don't have enough groceries? What if I don't have enough money? I mean, they do have a lot of stress about future things, financial things, caring for themselves. They've been cared for their whole life. So this is a big change for them as they're getting ready to leave the home. And then family can add a certain amount of stress. We know that relational safety is primary to teens being able to talk to their parents about things, but not all teens experience relational safety in their homes. Sometimes there's family discord, sometimes there's divorce, or just difficult situations, medical complications going on in homes. There's all kinds of reasons that teens absorb stress in the home. So, you know, this is just some poll quotes, and I'm not going to read them out loud to you, but, you know, these are just some poll quotes about what affects kids regularly, and they are feeling alone. The Surgeon General put out a warning not too long ago about loneliness across age groups in our country right now, and teenagers are no strangers to this. They are feeling hyperconnected online, but sometimes pervasively lonely when they're on their own, and when they can't connect with someone, when they can't get that instant connection through their phones or their laptops. And so they're just dealing with a lot of stuff, and they're feeling disconnected, and they're just feeling this storm of emotions that they don't necessarily know what to do with, but they do try. They will try on their own to cope. And we'll see that in just a minute. But often they feel very isolated and like they're left to their own devices to work through things. So different teens have different hurdles, and we know this, and that goes back to meet them where they are. But we do know that teens coming from historically marginalized communities have different hurdles that we need to pay close attention to. So Black and Hispanic teens in this study did talk about feeling heightened pressure. Pressure to perform, pressure to overcome stereotypes, to do better than the generation before them, so that they wouldn't face the same issues that their parents faced. And there was sort of a lot of nuance with these kids in terms of, you know, do they feel like they can open up, and do they feel like they just have to put their heads down and get through everything so that they can achieve their goals. So there was just very much this mentality of really having to work hard and not be seen as soft or weak. So we know that teens, I mean, teens love to surround themselves with other teens, right? That's number one. So you tend to see large groups of teens walking around communities or going to parties or doing things together, but they actually trust very few people. So they have kind of small circles of trust. They will have a few friends, and we'll see in the next couple slides how they build those trusting relationships, but they tend to have a few friends that they trust a lot. These tend to be the people they've known for their entire lives or for a long period of time. And they do tend to go to their friends first right now for advice or to vent or just to talk about things. Now, teens who do experience relational safety in the home are likely to go to a parent because they feel that they can go to a parent and not be judged or criticized or corrected for their choices. teens who don't experience relational safety in the home will not do that. They might look to other family members. Some of this comes down to cultural differences as well, where some kids are living in bigger extended families with closer contacts with relatives. And so they might go to an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent. A little bit hot and cold on trusting their teachers. And some of that comes down to longevity of relationships and how they build trust with teachers. That sort of last circle there is the mental health experts, for some kids, faith leaders, and other educators. That's where we kind of want them to move toward being able to build that trust faster with those groups so that they feel like those are people that they can go to. So this comes up all the time, always, with teenagers. They just don't feel like their parents get them. And they feel like going to their parents with their problems, they'll either be corrected or dismissed. Parents will either jump in with the fix and just tell them, 5 things to do to solve the problem, or they'll say something like, well, that's not really that big of a deal. You'll be fine. Just, go take a nap and it'll all be better when you wake up. They feel like they get some of that advice. So sometimes some of the teens talked about feeling like their parents just can't relate to them. They don't understand their likes and dislikes and what they go through. And I do think that that's a legitimate concern among generational gaps right now, where, parents of Gen X and parents of millennials maybe are not, those age groups are not understanding how teens interact and how they do things and how they solve problems together and how they connect. And so they don't feel understood, and they feel like parents are constantly telling them, get off your phone, when their phone is their lifeline to social connections in many cases. And so that's something that's, definitely difficult between the generations. The oldest of us are likely to say, like, just put it down, just walk away from it, where, younger parents are more likely to say, okay, I get it a little bit, but here's what you should do. And what they're wanting is empathy. They're wanting empathic communication, and they're wanting parents to listen. They feel like parents are just not in tune. They're not attuned to their difficulties and the things that they're going through. And when trauma is involved, it's even more pronounced, those sort of differences between parents and kids. So this is like a super busy slide. So I'm just going to give you the highlights of this one. But I mentioned it earlier. So some teens do trust some teachers. One thing that's difficult about building those trusting relationships with teachers, particularly in larger schools, is that students are likely to only have a teacher for about a year, maybe even one semester if it's an elective course. And so sometimes they develop a relationship with a teacher only to not ever have that teacher again, and not really have the time to check in with that teacher because they're so busy with their other classes. And so that's kind of the crux of why it becomes difficult to build these relationships. If students had the same teachers over and over again, if there was one teacher that taught all the English classes for one cohort of kids, they would develop deeper and more meaningful relationships where they might find those trusting relationships. But that's not how high school works. They go from class to class, from teacher to teacher, and each year they get a new batch of teachers, and each year teachers get an inordinate amount of students that they try to meet and try to support. And so it is difficult, and they want to connect with their teachers, but they also fear, there is still that factor of, well, is my teacher going to have to tell on me? Are they going to see me as a person, or are they going to see me as a student? Are they going to have to connect with my parents over things? So those are all legitimate concerns, which goes back to John's point of, is it stigma or stigma adjacent, or is it all kind of intermingled? So for teens, trusting an adult looks like that empathic listening, the emotional comfort, that's huge. So that side of the slide is actually, to me, I would argue, the most important side of this slide. This is how adults build relational safety with teenagers, whether it's a teacher or a parent or a coach. Being able to empathize with kids and being able to say, that sounds really hard. I'm sorry. I wish I could fix it for you. I know I can't. What can I do? I'm here. The words "I'm here" are two of the most powerful words adults can use with teens, and often we don't, because it's our instinct to want to fix problems and to want to jump in with all of our years of wisdom and help. And that's not what teens are looking for. So they're looking for that comfort on the one hand, and then also maybe some guidance, but also guidance that they can work through with adults, not just being told to go through a checklist of stuff, but someone who helps them figure things out, talk through it, maybe scaffold some skills, and then revisit. So teens are often clouded by just negative thinking and negative associations. So if they have one bad experience where they've gone to a coach and that coach immediately called a parent and told the parent everything the teen said, suddenly what gets mapped into their brains is, well, the coaches they're not trustworthy. You can't go to a coach with any of your problems. And so, when they start to have problems, they cross that person or anyone in that category off their list of potential helpers. And this is, a cognitive distortion, and adults are prone to doing the same thing in terms of just cutting out entire systems based on one bad experience. But this is a place where we can actually really get in the weeds and help teens. When they have a positive experience with someone helping them, they are more likely to go back to that person or someone else in that category of people in the future with a problem. So when we learn how to help, how to be better helpers, they are more likely to come to us for help, is the bottom line. So a lot of teens, and this generation of teens, I will say, and especially in this sort of post-COVID time period that we're living in, these teenagers have been told since 2019 to be resilient. And they're told that they are resilient and they can get through anything. And all they have to do is just get through stuff and they'll be fine. And the word resilient had a huge moment during the pandemic, and it continues to have a moment. And I have to tell you, what teens hear when we yell resilience at them is toughen up, get through it, do it on your own. And that's dangerous messaging because honestly, co-regulation and working through things together is the key to people thriving. We humans are social creatures, and by design. And so when we tell teens to do everything on their own, they don't know how. And that's a disconnect that makes them feel isolated and alone and like they don't have the support they need. They will try things on their own. Now, when we look at teens on phones and tablets, we say, oh my gosh, there they go again. They're just on Snapchat all the time. What are they doing? Often they're distracting themselves. Often they're watching funny videos on TikTok, actually. They're not even on Snapchat. They're just scrolling, trying to distract their brains by watching things that might make them laugh. Some teens will just kind of tough it out. Many are suffering in silence across the country right now. They're just trying to get through things. They will talk about sleeping it off and napping when they're feeling totally overwhelmed. And then some will do positive things, engage in positive coping skills like journaling. The nice thing about social media is that there are some good channels out there that teach teens some healthy skills. So there's actually been a boon of teens journaling in the last few months that I have observed, or listening to music, making playlists for certain moods. They call them mood lists. And that's a good coping skill. That's a good way to work through a hard thing. So like I said, teens always have their own lexicon, right? And their own vernacular, and they don't often use the word stigma right now. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means they don't use that word. So they might say things like, well, I don't want to be judged. That's big right now with teens. I don't want to be judged. She's judging me. He's judging me. They're judging me. My parents always judge me. That comes up a lot with teenagers. So the absence of the word stigma does not mean that they're not feeling it and that stigma is not a barrier to them. It just means that they've kind of rewritten it in a different way. They might express feeling embarrassed about going into a counseling center at school. They might express feeling weak because they weren't able to solve their problems on their own, or they might, share feelings of shame or vulnerability, and that to them, all of those things to them are kind of negative, and they don't want to be labeled. Teens talk a lot about, they misuse words a lot. So, and I'll spare you, that's a whole other talk, but But one thing I have noticed with teens is they'll say things like, well, I don't want to have mental health. And I'm always saying, well, that's funny. Everybody has mental health, right? We have our physical health and our mental health, and that's just part of who we are. But those terms, mental health, have become weaponized a little bit in this generation of teens, even though they're more likely to talk about anxiety, depression, sadness, feeling like they don't have enough friends. They are more likely to talk about hard things, but they don't like the words mental health. And that's kind of their stigma word. So particularly in the Black African-American community, teens are feeling like they will be labeled. So like they'll be just given a label as somebody who's not mentally healthy, or maybe even a specific diagnosis, or that they'll be seen as weak, and that will be used against them. And this comes from, systemic racism in our country, both in schools, in healthcare, even in mental health. I mean, mental health is not a field that's free of systemic racism. And so there are a lot of teens walking through schools all across the country that are really struggling with some of these traumas that have been passed down generationally, and that they feel. And this can make it difficult for them to ask for help. So again, this is a busy slide with a lot, kind of like this is the whole gamut of what came up in these qualitative interviews, and really important information. And if you start to look sort of for the themes in these bolded words, what you're going to see is, feeling worried about how parents are going to handle things. Teens are very protective of their parents right now. They don't want to add stress to their plates. So often they will keep things inside until it's really an emergency to protect their parents from their stress. Many are thinking that their parents are kind of distant from them, or, don't have that relational connection that they need to feel safe enough to come forward with what they're going through, or they're not getting those empathic responses from their parents. Teaching parents how to engage in empathic communication is honestly like one of the most powerful things that we can do as educators and as mental health workers, because I find that it's just a lot of people don't know how to do that in general, and it really changes how we relate to one another and how we can become helpers for one another. So I don't know. Yeah, we won't go through all that. So our next steps, we are, as John mentioned earlier, we're about to start the quantitative portion of the research. And so this is going to go out to about 1,500 teens, I think. Yeah, we're trying to aim for 1,500 teens. And they're going to tell us, hopefully, all sorts of things about what accounts for their barriers, the things that are challenges for them. We know that teens are having a lot of challenges around social stuff, academic stuff, but also the first thing listed here is environmental stressors. This is really big among teens. They have grown up in a time where their schools don't necessarily feel safe for them, where their landscapes don't necessarily feel safe for them. So in terms of natural disasters, it seems like almost every 4 to 6 weeks, there's some other giant natural disaster somewhere in the country that really negatively impacts a lot of people. And so they feel a lot of stress around that. They feel stress around family stuff. So we'll be looking at, are there certain stressors that are, more prominent for teens or play a stronger role? How does it differ by subgroups? So we're going to kind of get in the weeds with all of that stuff. And then we're going to look at when teens do actually seek help. What are the situations? What are the contexts? What are the problems that get them to the point of asking for help instead of just trying to deal with it on their own? What types of supports do they see as available for them, and which ones will they use? Stuff like that. And then we'll also look at why they're not seeking help. So more questions around, similar to the qualitative research, but more questions around, is it stigma? If it's not just stigma, what else is it? Because we want to get a comprehensive picture. We want to get the whole landscape of what prevents teens from asking for help and for giving help to others. All right. And, this is just more about our quantitative questions and what we'll be doing. Pass it back to John. You're on mute, John.
There you go. Thank you. Thanks so much, Katie. So as thanks for the opportunity to share that with you. And so, as Katie said, we're going to move into this quant study, and then, share the results, socialize the results in the field. And then what we intend to do is to move into a phase around messaging and creative executions, but not necessarily taking it all the way through to new ads, but more, trying to translate the research into creative briefs about how, we as a field can approach messaging to foster more help seeking and help giving, but also to make sure it's tailored, right? So it may not one campaign potentially, but multiple campaigns to have a universal outcome. We're going to need tailored approaches, and so that's what we're sort of trying to do here, and look forward to feedback and comments from everybody participating in the grand challenge. Rachel, I'll just invite you in. I don't know if there's any questions.
Yes, and thank you so much, John and Dr. Hurley, for presenting. This is really exciting research. So and I'll just remind everyone now that the Q&A is open, so be posting your questions there. But our first question is asking, how did you as adults manage the barriers doing the qualitative studies to make sure that you were getting, such honest answers that you did?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. We hired a research firm, with expertise, and really set up the research design with adequate time to really just go deep with the youth who were interviewed, and I think that was just a process that created the kind of safety, with who the moderators were and their training, and the young people to result in such good and insightful feedback. I don't know, Katie, if you would add anything more to that.
That about sums it up.
We have a whole team that does that, by the way. Katie didn't do it and I didn't do it, but we have a design and impact team, but they did a good job on this, and C&R was the research firm. So the letter C and R, I think it might've been on some of the slides. If you're interested, is the research firm that's doing the work with us.
That's great. Thank you. We have a question from Chris, who has asked, was the data gathered from a wide geographical range?
It was, I believe, now but we all need to, sort of step back. So the answer is yes, but let's remember it's 44 people. It's qualitative, it's subjective. We cannot over project, what that qualitative part of the research tells us. But the idea is, starting with qualitative, we get these really good insights and these things to explore in the quantitative. So the answer is yes, but we want to make sure that we don't over project. In the quantitative, we'll make sure that we have geographic representation, from frontier to suburban to urban, and all across the country in terms of different regions.
And it's notable that when we showed that slide about participants, only one person identified as neither male nor female, but questioning. So, that's not obviously that's not a representative sample of all of the teens. But like John says, the qualitative research gives you your starting point. It gives you your questions to ask in the quantitative.
Yeah. And I maybe I made this point before, but I feel like there's a high responsibility on our field, to do this kind of research. But it's like, let this piece of research, let's give us the benefit of the doubt that the quantitative research is really well done, and and here it is. How long, what's its shelf life? 2 years? I don't think it's longer than 2 years. Because just things are changing so fast, and young people are growing up so fast, and the world is changing. So this is the kind of research, if we really want to be having the kind of influence we want, I think we have to think about as a field, how are we doing this almost on a continual basis? And we wanted to do this research at this phase with 18 to 24-year-olds. And honestly, we couldn't afford to do 13 to 17-year-olds and 18 to 14-year-olds at the same time. We had to sequence it. So one of the things I hope for, in the grand challenge, is that we can also, find mechanisms to share our research with each other, so we can all sort of learn together as a collective.
Thanks, John and Katie. And that's a great point. And I think a lot of the Grand Challenge members are hoping to similarly share research. On a similar vein, what made you or Jed Foundation decide to do 13 to 17-year-olds first before 18 to 24-year-olds?
Yeah, I mean, we felt I'm not even sure if I totally remember all the arguments. We spent a lot of time talking about it. I think the main thing was we felt that less was known about 13 to 17-year-olds, and that there would be more value in going with them first.
Just from an IRB perspective, it's more difficult to study 13 to 17-year-olds in terms of just getting a study past IRB. And so that's why there's always, they're understudied in general, but we can't just study 18 to 24-year-olds and then say, well, this must sort of apply, it trickles down to teens, because it doesn't, right? Those are two very different age groups. And so that's a good reason to really focus on a study like this first, so that we can actually get some real-time information.
That's a really great point. Another question has come in. It says, I'm curious about the balance between adults sharing their stories, but also being fully present and not letting our stories devalue that of the adolescent's experience.
I'll take that one. So what I always say is adults should share their stories a little bit, right? But share their stories light. Because one thing that can tend to happen is that teens, when adults share a story in response to a teen sharing a story, it starts to feel like a competition, right? So what we want to do is connect by saying, oh, I remember something similar that happened to me. Let me tell you about this, and then we'll get back to you and we'll talk about how we're going to work through your thing. Because sometimes that can just help kids feel like they can connect more to their parents, and like maybe that age gap isn't so big, or those differences aren't so huge. That's why storytelling, shared storytelling can really help. And that's something that's been around for centuries. Humans have engaged in shared storytelling in, circle times. It's called circle times, and sharing circles, knitting circles. This is what people do to kind of work through hard things together.
Thank you. One more question. So in regards to future messaging plans, are there anything you have planned, anything you're expecting to learn from the next phase of the study? What are you kind of anticipating in regards to messaging outward to this population or to the parents?
Yeah, so our thinking on this was, we'll of course use the learnings to inform all of the messaging we do at the Jed Foundation through campaigns like Seize the Awkward, and we have lived experience storytelling campaign called Jed Voices, and in how we sort of show up on social media, et cetera. But we were a little bit more thinking about this particular project as, trying to inform the field and produce a quantitative study that could be a value sort of to a wider set of organizations. And we're not viewing it so much in that linear way that it's our own in-house research that's going to inform our own campaigns. It will, but we wanted to try to make it more of a sort of an open source to help the whole field, and maybe too we'll get some feedback from colleagues and peers that they would have done some things differently in the research, and that'll be valuable, I think, for us all as a field, so that we can sort of iterate and learn together. Like, so for example, and I think also a big part of this conversation is also what Making Care Common just produced. Their research on parents and caregivers and teens is also super helpful. So trying to find a way that we can all sort of learn together and advance together, perhaps in a more cohesive and quicker way.
Thank you. There are no more questions right now. So I really appreciate you sharing this research. I think it's really fruitful and exciting for the future. So thank you again, and thank you to all of our attendees.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel, and thanks to everybody who joined today.
Of course.